The smell of salt and rotting fish clung to Clara Bennett's skin like a second layer she could never scrub away, no matter how hard she tried. It was the scent of survival, the perfume of poverty, and on that bitter December morning, with the wind howling through the cracks in the cottage walls, it was the only thing standing between her family and starvation. Her father's cough echoed from the back room, wet and rattling, a sound that had become as familiar as the creaking of the old floorboards. Clara counted the coins in her apron pocket, 3 pennies and a half, and tried not to think about the fact that her younger sisters, Lily and Rose, had gone to bed hungry again. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow I'll sell more. But tomorrow was never guaranteed. The harbour was still dark when she arrived, the lanterns on the fishing boats bobbing like drunken fireflies against the black water. She had learned long ago that the earliest buyers got the best fish, and the best fish meant the difference between her sisters eating or not. Her hands, red and cracked from the cold, moved with practiced efficiency as she examined the morning's catch, haggling with fishermen who had known her since she was a child. "You drive a hard bargain for a girl so small," old Thomas said, shaking his head as she walked away with 3 fine cod for less than he wanted to charge. "I have to," Clara replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Hard times make hard people." She was 19 years old, but she felt ancient. The weight of responsibility had aged her faster than any calendar could measure. While other young women her age dreamed of handsome suitors and pretty dresses, Clara dreamed of full bellies and warm fires. Her mother had died bringing Rose into the world 7 years ago, and her father had never quite recovered from the loss, not emotionally, and certainly not physically after the accident at the mill that had crushed his leg. Now she was the breadwinner, the protector, the one who had to be strong when everyone else was weak. The morning market was bustling by the time she set up her stall, arranging the fish on a bed of ice she had collected from the cold stream behind the cottage. She called out prices, smiled at customers, and tried not to notice when wealthy women in silk dresses wrinkled their noses as they passed. She was invisible to them, less than invisible. She was something to be stepped around, like mud on the street. By midday, she had sold most of her stock. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but she ignored it. Every penny she spent on herself was a penny her sisters didn't have for bread. She was used to hunger. It was an old companion, unwelcome but familiar. The rain started as she was packing up, a cold drizzle that quickly became a downpour. Clara pulled her shawl over her head and began the long walk home, her shoes squelching in the mud of the coastal road. She was halfway to the village when she heard the shouting. It came from behind the old stone church on the hill, St. Margaret's, which had stood there for 300 years and looked every day of it. Clara hesitated. The smart thing to do was keep walking. Trouble had a way of finding people who went looking for it, and she had enough trouble already. But then she heard something else, a cry of pain, followed by laughter, cruel laughter, the kind that made her stomach turn. Clara set down her basket and crept toward the sound, her heart pounding. Behind the church, in the muddy cemetery where the gravestones leaned like crooked teeth, 3 young men stood over a 4th who was crumpled on the ground. Even in the rain, she could see the blood on his face. "That'll teach you to know your place," one of them said, delivering a final kick to the man's ribs. "Dirty gutter rat, thinking he can compete with his betters. Next time you'll think twice before showing up at a scholarship examination," another added. "That place at the Inns of Court is for gentlemen, not bastards without a penny to their name." The third man laughed. "Let's go, he's not worth the mud on our boots." Clara pressed herself against the church wall, hidden in the shadows, as the 3 young men strode away. She recognized them. Lord Henry Ashcombe and his friends, sons of the local gentry, the same ones who occasionally passed through the market as if they were doing the common people a favor by breathing the same air. They climbed into a waiting carriage and disappeared down the road, their laughter fading into the sound of the rain. For a moment, Clara considered leaving. Whoever was lying in that mud, he was nothing to her. She had her own problems, her own family to worry about. But then the figure on the ground moved, trying and failing to push himself up, and something in her chest tightened. She had been stepped on her whole life. She knew what it felt like to be treated as less than human, and she had always hated bullies. With a sigh, She picked up her basket and walked toward the fallen man. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 20 or 21, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. Blood seeped from a cut above his eye, and his shirt was torn at the collar. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark and intelligent, filled with a pain that went deeper than the physical beating he had just endured. "Can you stand?" Clara asked, crouching beside him. He looked up at her, startled, as if he hadn't expected anyone to stop. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what it's like to be kicked when you're down. Now answer my question. Can you stand?" With her help, he managed to get to his feet, though he swayed dangerously. He was tall, taller than he had looked on the ground, and thin in a way that suggested he hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. His clothes, though clean, were patched and worn, the fabric faded from years of use. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "But you shouldn't have stopped. If they'd seen you—" "They didn't see me, and I've never been very good at walking past someone in need." Clara adjusted her grip on his arm. "Come on, my cottage isn't far. You need to get out of this rain before you catch your death." "I can't impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering. There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded, and together they began the slow walk toward Clara's home. His name, she learned, was Adrian Kingsley. He had no family, or at least none that would claim him. His mother had died 10 years ago, leaving him with nothing but an old pendant she had worn around her neck and a sealed letter he had never opened. "She told me only to read it if my life depended on it," he explained, his voice bitter. "I suppose I've never been desperate enough." He had been raised in a workhouse, educated by a kind-hearted vicar, who had recognized his intelligence and taught him to read. For years, he had worked odd jobs, stable hand, dock worker, clerk, while studying law books by candlelight, dreaming of becoming a barrister. "My mother lost everything because of corrupt landlords," he said, his jaw tightening. "They took our home, our land, everything we had. She died in poverty, and there was no justice for her. I swore I would learn the law so I could help people like her, people who have no one to speak for them." Clara listened in silence as she cleaned the cut above his eye. They were sitting in the main room of the cottage, the fire crackling in the hearth, the rain still hammering against the windows. Her father was asleep in the back room, and her sisters were at a neighbor's house, so they were alone. "The scholarship examination," she said, dabbing at the wound with a clean cloth. "That's why those men attacked you?" Adrian nodded grimly. "The scholarship would have paid for my studies at the Inns of Court. But only one candidate could receive it, and the examiners told me I had scored higher than anyone else, higher than Lord Henry Ashcombe." His hands clenched into fists. "He didn't take it well, so he and his friends decided to make sure you couldn't accept the scholarship." "Something like that." Adrian looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "But the worst part is, they'll succeed. The scholarship committee is made up of men like them, men who believe that birth determines worth. Even if they gave me the scholarship, I'd be fighting an uphill battle every single day. No one wants a workhouse orphan in their precious Inns of Court." Clara set down the cloth and met his gaze squarely. "So you're going to give up?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It was written all over your face." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to fight against a system designed to keep people like us in our place." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't I?" She gestured around the cottage, the patched walls, the threadbare furniture, the meager fire struggling to keep the cold at bay. "I've been fighting my whole life. Every single day, I wake up before dawn and walk 3 miles to the harbor so I can buy fish before the other sellers. I haggle with men who think I'm worth less because I'm a woman. I smile at customers who look at me like I'm something stuck to the bottom of their shoe. And I do it all so my sisters can eat, so my father can have his medicine, so my family doesn't end up on the street. So don't tell me I don't understand fighting. I understand it better than anyone." Silence fell between them. Adrian stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect, maybe both. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I shouldn't have assumed." "No, you shouldn't have." Clara's voice softened. "But I understand why you did. Life has beaten you down, and you're tired. It's easier to give up than to keep fighting when the odds are stacked against you. But if you give up now, then those men win. Lord Henry Ashcombe wins. And every person like your mother, every person who needs someone to fight for them, loses. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his shirt and pulled out a small silver pendant, a delicate thing, shaped like a crescent moon with a tiny star beside it. My mother gave me this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She told me it was the only thing she had left of my father. She never told me who he was, only that he couldn't be with us, and that I should never try to find him. Clara looked at the pendant, glinting in the firelight. It was beautiful, finer than anything she had ever owned. It's lovely. It's all I have left of her. Adrian tucked it back under his shirt. Along with the letter she told me never to open. Sometimes I wonder if she was trying to protect me from something. Or someone. Maybe one day you'll find out. Maybe. Adrian looked at her again, his expression unreadable. You're very kind, miss. I'm sorry. I don't even know your name. Clara. Clara Bennett. Thank you, Clara Bennett. For stopping. For helping me. Most people would have walked right past. Most people are too busy worrying about their own problems to notice anyone else's, Clara said. I suppose I'm just too stubborn to look away. A ghost of a smile crossed Adrian's face, the first she had seen from him. Stubbornness is an underrated virtue. I certainly think so. That was the beginning. Clara didn't know it then, couldn't have known it, but that rainy afternoon behind St. Margaret's Church would change the course of her entire life. And Adrian's too, for better and for worse. In the weeks that followed, Adrian became a fixture at the Bennett cottage. He helped Clara's father with small tasks around the house, read stories to Lily and Rose, and spent long hours in conversation with Clara about everything and nothing. She learned that he had a sharp wit and a sharper mind, that he could quote Shakespeare and Blackstone with equal ease, and that beneath his quiet exterior burned a fierce determination to make something of himself. I won't always be poor, he told her one evening, as they sat on the steps of the cottage watching the sun sink into the sea. One day, I'll be someone who matters, someone who can make a difference. I believe you, Clara said, and she meant it. But belief didn't pay for law books, or examination fees, or the cost of living while Adrian studied. The scholarship was gone, taken by Lord Henry Ashcombe's family connections, and no other assistance was forthcoming. Adrian worked when he could, but the jobs he could find, unloading ships at the harbour, sweeping floors at the tavern, paid barely enough to keep him fed. Clara watched him struggle, watched the hope slowly drain from his eyes, and made a decision. She had been saving money for years, pennies hidden in a jar beneath the floorboards, meant for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was something. And now, she realized, the emergency wasn't her own. It was Adrian's. I'm going to help you, she told him one morning, presenting the jar with its meager collection of coins. Adrian stared at her, his face a mixture of shock and denial. Clara, I can't take your money. This is everything you have. It's not everything, she said, though they both knew it was close. And it's not a gift, it's an investment. When you become a great barrister, you can pay me back, with interest. But your family will be fine. I'll sell more fish. I'll find a way. She pressed the jar into his hands. Take it, Adrian. Please, let me do this for you. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, his fingers closed around the jar, and when he looked at her, there were tears in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by succeeding, by becoming the lawyer you always wanted to be, by fighting for the people who need you. I will. His voice was fierce with determination. I swear it, Clara. I'll make you proud. I know you will. And so it began. Clara took on extra work, rising even earlier, to visit 2 different markets each day. She sold fish in the morning, and mended clothes in the afternoon. She skipped meals, telling her sisters she had already eaten. She patched her shoes with scraps of leather, instead of buying new ones. Every spare penny went to Adrian's education, books, fees, lodging near the Inns of Court in London. It wasn't easy. There were days when Clara was so exhausted she could barely stand, nights when she lay awake worrying about how she would afford her father's medicine. But every time she received a letter from Adrian, telling her about his studies, about the cases he was learning, about the future he was building, she felt a surge of pride that made all the sacrifices worthwhile. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave," her father told her one evening, watching her count coins at the kitchen table. "All for a man who isn't even your husband." "He will be," Clara said quietly, "one day." Her father raised an eyebrow. "You're so sure?" She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've never been more sure of anything." The months turned into years. Adrian's letters grew more confident, more hopeful. He was excelling in his studies, impressing his professors, making connections that would serve him well in his future career. And in every letter, he told Clara how much he missed her, how grateful he was for her sacrifices, how he couldn't wait for the day they could be together properly. "You're the reason I keep going," he wrote. "When I'm exhausted and discouraged, when I wonder if all this struggle is worth it, I think of you. I think of your strength, your determination, your belief in me, and I know I can't let you down." Clara treasured those letters, reading them over and over by candlelight, until the paper grew soft from handling. She carried them with her always, tucked into her apron pocket, a reminder of why she worked so hard, why she sacrificed so much. And then, one spring morning, a letter arrived that made her heart stop. "I've done it," Adrian wrote. "I've passed my final examinations with the highest honors. I'm a barrister now, Clara. A real barrister. And it's all because of you. Come to London as soon as you can. I have something important to ask you." Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. All those years of struggle, all those sacrifices, and finally, they had paid off. She left for London the very next day. The city was overwhelming. The noise, the crowds, the sheer size of it. But Clara barely noticed. All she could think about was Adrian. She found him waiting for her outside the Inns of Court, and when he saw her, his face broke into the most brilliant smile she had ever seen. "Clara," he breathed, crossing the distance between them in 3 quick strides, and then his arms were around her, lifting her off her feet, spinning her in circles while passers-by stared and tutted. "Put me down, you fool," she laughed, but she was crying again, and so was he. "I can't believe you're here," he said, setting her down but not letting go. "I can't believe any of this is real." "It's real. You did it, Adrian. You really did it. We did it." He cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes shining. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Clara. Every case I won, every examination I passed, it was all because of you. You gave me everything. You believed in me when no one else did. I always believed in you, from the very first moment, and I love you for it." The words hung in the air between them, and Clara's heart skipped a beat. "I've loved you for years, Clara Bennett, since the day you found me bleeding in the mud and refused to walk away, and I promised myself that if I ever became a barrister, I would ask you to be my wife." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, simple and elegant, the metal catching the light. "Will you marry me, Clara? I can't offer you much. I'm just a poor lawyer with nothing to his name but the clothes on his back and the knowledge in his head, but I can offer you my heart, my devotion, and my undying gratitude. I can offer you a life together, whatever that life may bring." Clara looked at the ring, at Adrian's hopeful face, and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. This was the moment she had dreamed of for years, the moment she had worked toward, sacrificed for, believed in, and now it was finally here. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I'll marry you, you ridiculous, wonderful man." Adrian's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, right there in the middle of the street, while London bustled around them. It was the happiest moment of Clara's life. They married 3 months later, in the tiny village church where they had first met. It was a small ceremony, just Clara's family, a few of Adrian's colleagues from the Inns of Court, and the old vicar who had taught Adrian to read. Clara wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Adrian looked handsome in his new barrister's robes. "I never thought I'd see this day," Clara's father said, squeezing her hand as he walked her down the aisle. "I never thought I'd see my daughter so happy." "I am happy, Papa, happier than I ever thought possible." And she was, standing at the altar, her hand in Adrian's, She felt like the luckiest woman in the world. They had nothing, no money, no property, no social standing, but they had each other, and that was enough. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to stand by your side through every trial, every hardship, every joy. I promise to never forget what you've done for me, and to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love." Clara's throat was too tight for words. She simply nodded, her tears saying everything she couldn't. The reception was held in the churchyard, with bread and cheese and a jug of ale that one of Adrian's colleagues had brought from London. It was modest, but it was joyful, and as Clara looked around at the smiling faces, she felt a contentment that went bone deep. They spent their wedding night in a small inn by the sea, the same inn where Clara sometimes sold fish to the landlord. Adrian had saved for weeks to afford the room, and when Clara saw the effort he had made, the flowers on the table, the candles flickering in the window, she almost started crying again. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "Yes, I did." Adrian took her hands in his. "You've given me everything, Clara. Your savings, your time, your belief. You've worked yourself to the bone so I could chase my dreams. I wanted our wedding night to be special. I wanted you to feel like the treasure you are. I don't need flowers and candles to feel treasured. I just need you. You have me. Forever." They lay together that night, listening to the waves crash against the shore, and talked about their future. Adrian was already taking on cases, defending the poor and the dispossessed, fighting the same corrupt system that had destroyed his mother. He was building a reputation as a brilliant and passionate advocate, and though the work didn't pay much yet, he was hopeful. "One day, I'll be able to give you the life you deserve," he murmured, stroking her hair. "A proper house, fine clothes, servants. You won't have to sell fish anymore. You won't have to work at all." Clara smiled in the darkness. "I don't mind working. I've been working my whole life. I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I stopped." "Then you can do whatever you want. Read books, paint pictures, take long walks by the sea. You've earned it, my love. You've earned a lifetime of ease. As long as I'm with you, I don't care about ease." Adrian kissed her forehead. "I don't deserve you." "Nonsense. We deserve each other." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, Clara didn't worry about tomorrow. The first year of their marriage was the happiest of Clara's life. They lived in a small apartment in a modest part of London, close enough to the Inns of Court that Adrian could walk to work. Clara kept the apartment spotless, cooked their meals with care, and continued to sell fish at the local market, despite Adrian's protests. "I don't want my wife working like a common fishwife," he said, frowning as she packed her basket one morning. "I am a common fishwife," Clara replied with a smile. "I've never pretended to be anything else. And besides, the extra money helps. Your cases don't pay much yet, and we need to eat. I should be supporting you, not the other way around. We support each other. That's what marriage is." Adrian sighed, but he didn't argue further. He knew better than to argue with Clara when she had made up her mind. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Adrian reading law books while Clara mended clothes or wrote letters to her family. Sometimes Adrian would tell her about his cases, the people he was helping, the injustices he was fighting. Clara listened with pride, marveling at the man he had become. "Do you remember when I found you behind the church?" she asked one night, setting aside her sewing. "You were so broken, so hopeless." "I remember." Adrian's voice was quiet. "I thought my life was over. I thought there was no point in fighting anymore. And now look at you, a barrister, a husband, a man who makes a difference in people's lives. I owe it all to you." "No." Clara shook her head firmly. "I helped you, yes. But you did the work. You studied, you persevered, you refused to give up. I just gave you a push in the right direction. You gave me more than a push. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to keep going." Adrian reached over and took her hand. "I will never stop being grateful for that, Clara. Never." Clara squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I know." She believed him then. She believed him completely. She had no reason not to. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 years after their wedding day. Clara was at the market when she saw the messenger. a liveried servant on a fine horse, his uniform emblazoned with a crest she didn't recognize. He was asking for directions to Adrian Kingsley's residence, and the other vendors pointed him toward the apartment. A cold feeling settled in Clara's stomach. She packed up her stall early and hurried home, her mind racing with possibilities. Was Adrian in trouble? Had something happened with one of his cases? The crest on the messenger's uniform was noble. She could tell that much, and nobles rarely brought good news to people like them. When she arrived at the apartment, she found Adrian sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Adrian," she rushed to his side. "What is it? What's happened?" He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, slowly, he looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "The Duke of Ashcombe is dying," he said, his voice strange and hollow. "He sent for me." "The Duke? Why would the Duke send for you?" Adrian's hand went to his chest, to the pendant he still wore beneath his shirt. "Because, Clara, I'm his son." The world tilted. Clara gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "His son? But how? I don't understand." "Neither do I. Not fully." Adrian looked down at the letter again. "Apparently, the Duke had an affair with my mother years ago. He never knew she was pregnant, and she never told him. But now his only legitimate son is dead. A hunting accident, the letter says, and he has no other heir. Someone told him about me, about the pendant. The pendant your mother gave you." "Yes." Adrian pulled it out, staring at the crescent moon and star. "It was his. He gave it to her when they were together. It's the proof of my identity." Clara's mind was reeling. The Duke of Ashcombe, she knew the name, of course, everyone did. The Ashcombe family was one of the oldest and wealthiest in England, with an estate in Yorkshire that spanned thousands of acres. Lord Henry Ashcombe, the man who had beaten Adrian behind the church all those years ago, was the Duke's nephew. "What does this mean?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "It means I'm his heir." Adrian's voice cracked. "It means I'm going to be the next Duke of Ashcombe." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the revelation hung in the air between them, immense and terrifying. Then Clara did the only thing she could think to do. She knelt beside Adrian's chair and took his hands in hers. "Whatever happens," she said firmly, "we'll face it together, just like we've faced everything else." Adrian looked at her, and for just a moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with, the poor, determined boy who had sworn to fight for justice. "Together," he repeated, squeezing her hands. "I'll need you, Clara, more than ever, and I'll be here, always." But even as she said the words, Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The world of dukes and duchesses was not her world. It was a world of silk and privilege, of whispered intrigues and ancient grudges. It was a world where women like her, common, uneducated working-class women, were not welcome. She pushed the thought aside. Adrian loved her. That was all that mattered. Or so she believed. They traveled to Yorkshire the following week, in a carriage sent by the Duke himself. Clara had never ridden in anything so fine, and she spent the first hour of the journey running her fingers over the velvet seats and staring out the window at the passing countryside. Adrian sat beside her, his expression distant, lost in his own thoughts. "Are you nervous?" Clara asked, reaching for his hand. "Terrified," he admitted. "I've never met my father. I know nothing about him except what my mother told me, and she told me very little." "What did she tell you?" Adrian was silent for a moment. "She said he was a good man, but trapped by his position, his family, his responsibilities. She said he loved her, but that love wasn't enough to overcome the walls between them." "That's terribly sad." "Yes." Adrian's jaw tightened. "When I was younger, I hated him. I blamed him for abandoning my mother, for leaving us to struggle in poverty while he lived in luxury. But now I'm not sure what to feel." "You don't have to decide right away," Clara said gently. "Just meet him. Talk to him. The rest can come later." The Ashcombe estate was beyond anything Clara had ever imagined. The house, if it could even be called a house, was a sprawling mansion of grey stone, with towers and turrets and windows that glittered in the afternoon sun. The grounds stretched as far as the eye could see. manicured gardens giving way to rolling hills and ancient forests. It was like something out of a fairy tale, and Clara felt utterly, completely out of place. "This is where I come from," Adrian murmured as the carriage pulled up to the front entrance. "This is my birthright." Clara heard something in his voice that made her uneasy, a note of wonder, yes, but also of hunger, as if he was already imagining himself as master of all this. Servants in immaculate uniforms escorted them inside, where they were greeted by a stern-faced man who introduced himself as Mr. Collins, the Duke's steward. "His Grace is resting," Collins said, his gaze flicking dismissively over Clara before settling on Adrian. "But he wishes to see you immediately. Come with me." Clara started to follow, but Collins held up a hand. "I'm afraid His Grace asked to see his son alone. You may wait in the drawing room, Mrs. Kingsley." The title was technically correct, but Clara heard the slight emphasis Collins placed on her name, a reminder that she was not, and would never be, Lady Ashcombe. She swallowed her pride and nodded. "Of course." Adrian squeezed her hand briefly before following Collins up the grand staircase. Clara watched him go, her heart pounding, and tried to ignore the feeling that everything was about to change. She waited for 3 hours. The drawing room was elegant, filled with furniture that probably cost more than her entire village, but Clara couldn't relax. She paced, she sat, she stood again. She examined the paintings on the walls, stern-faced ancestors staring down at her with what she imagined was disapproval, and the books on the shelves, their leather spines gleaming with gold lettering. Servants came and went, offering tea and refreshments that she barely touched. None of them spoke to her beyond what was strictly necessary, and Clara felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging. She knew what they were thinking. She was a fish seller, a common woman who had somehow married a man who might become a duke. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. When Adrian finally returned, his face was pale and his eyes were red. He had been crying, Clara realized with a start. She had never seen him cry before, not when he was beaten and bleeding behind the church, not during the long years of struggle and sacrifice. But now he looked utterly undone. "Adrian?" She rushed to his side. "What happened? Are you all right?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become unstable. "He's my father," Adrian whispered into her hair. "He looked at me, and he knew me instantly. He said I have my mother's eyes." "What else did he say?" Adrian pulled back, his expression conflicted. "He said he's sorry. He said he never knew about me, that if he had, he would have done things differently. He wants to make amends, Clara. He wants to acknowledge me as his son and heir." That's wonderful, isn't it?" "Yes, no, I don't know." Adrian ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of agitation she recognized well. "It's everything I never knew I wanted, and everything I'm afraid of, all at once." "What are you afraid of?" Adrian looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the answer before he spoke it. "I'm afraid of losing myself," he said quietly. "I'm afraid of becoming one of them." Clara took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You won't. You're not like them, Adrian. You're kind and good and just. You became a lawyer to help people, not to gain power. That doesn't change just because you've discovered who your father is. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. I've always had faith in you, and I always will." Adrian kissed her then, desperate and grateful, and Clara let herself believe that everything would be all right. But as the days passed, she began to see cracks in that belief. The Duke's condition worsened. The doctors said he had weeks, perhaps days, and as the old man faded, the pressure on Adrian intensified. The Duke's household was divided. Some, like Mr. Collins, accepted Adrian as the legitimate heir and treated him with grudging respect. Others, particularly the Duke's extended family, viewed him with open hostility. They saw him as an interloper, a bastard who had no right to the Ashcombe name or fortune, and they made no secret of their feelings. "I don't know why father is being so stubborn about this," Lady Margaret Ashcombe, the Duke's widowed sister, said loudly at dinner one evening. She didn't look at Adrian as she spoke, but her words were clearly aimed at him. "There are other heirs, proper heirs. Lord Victor, for example, would make an excellent duke." Lord Victor Ashcombe was the Duke's cousin. a handsome, charming man in his late 30s with cold eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. He had been visiting the estate frequently since Adrian's arrival, ostensibly to pay his respects to the dying duke. But Clara had seen the way he looked at Adrian, the barely concealed hatred that simmered beneath his polished surface. "I'm sure His Grace knows what's best for the estate," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Lady Margaret turned to look at her, as if noticing her for the first time. "And who are you, exactly?" "Oh yes, the fish seller." She smiled unpleasantly. "I must say, Adrian, you have interesting taste." Adrian's jaw tightened. "My wife is not a topic for discussion." "Of course not. I wouldn't dream of discussing her." Lady Margaret's tone made it clear that she had already said everything she needed to say. That night, Clara lay awake in their sumptuous bed, a bed so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud, and stared at the ceiling. "Are you awake?" she whispered. "Yes." Adrian's voice was heavy with exhaustion. "I can't sleep." "Neither can I." She turned to face him, finding his profile in the darkness. "Adrian, do you really want this? Being the Duke, I mean. Living here, dealing with people like Lady Margaret every day." "I don't have a choice." "Of course you have a choice. You always have a choice." "No." Adrian sat up, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand, Clara. This is my birthright. This estate, this title, they should have been mine from the beginning. My mother should have been the Duchess. Instead, she died in poverty, while these people lived in luxury. If I walk away now, I'm letting them win. I'm letting them keep everything they stole from her." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Is that what this is about? Revenge?" "It's about justice. The same justice I've always fought for." "Is it?" Clara sat up too, facing him. "Because it feels like something else. It feels like you're being pulled into their world, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose you." Adrian reached for her hand. "You'll never lose me, I promise." But promises, Clara had learned, were fragile things. Easily made, easily broken. Especially when they came from a man who was being offered everything he had ever wanted. The announcement came 3 days later. The Duke had formally acknowledged Adrian as his son and heir. The paperwork had been drawn up, the lawyers consulted, the necessary signatures obtained. Upon the Duke's death, which the doctors now said could come at any moment, Adrian Kingsley would become Adrian Ashcombe, the next Duke of Ashcombe. Clara stood at the back of the room as the family gathered to hear the announcement, her heart pounding. She watched Adrian, standing tall beside his father's bed, and felt a strange mixture of pride and dread. He looked like he belonged there. Already, he was carrying himself differently. Shoulders back, chin lifted, an air of authority that had never been there before. The poor boy she had found bleeding in the mud was disappearing, replaced by someone she barely recognized. "There is, however, one condition," the Duke's lawyer said, his voice cutting through Clara's thoughts. "A condition that must be met before the succession can be finalized." Adrian frowned. "What condition?" The lawyer glanced at Clara, and she felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Parliament and the House of Lords have expressed concerns about your marriage," the lawyer said carefully. "A future duke cannot have a common fish seller as his duchess. It would undermine the dignity of the title and create unacceptable social complications." The room went very quiet. "What are you saying?" Adrian's voice was dangerously calm. "I'm saying that if you wish to inherit the dukedom, you must annul your marriage to Mrs. Kingsley and marry a woman of appropriate station. Lady Evelyn Sinclair, for example, has been suggested as a suitable match. Her father is the Earl of Westmore, and the alliance would strengthen the Ashcombe position considerably." Clara felt the words hit her like physical blows. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She looked at Adrian, waiting for him to reject the condition immediately, to defend their marriage, to defend her. But he didn't. "There must be another way," Adrian said, his voice strained. "Surely." "I'm afraid not, sir. This condition comes directly from the House of Lords. Without compliance, the succession will be challenged, and the title will likely pass to Lord Victor Ashcombe." Lord Victor, standing near the window, allowed a small smile to cross his face. "I need time to think," Adrian said. "Of course, but I should remind you that His Grace does not have much time left. A decision must be made quickly." Adrian nodded, his face pale. He didn't look at Clara. And in that moment, Clara knew. The walk back to their chambers was the longest of her life. Adrian didn't speak, didn't reach for her hand. He walked slightly ahead, his shoulders stiff, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Clara followed, her heart shattering with every step. When they reached their room, she closed the door and turned to face him. "Say it," she said quietly. Adrian flinched. "Clara, say it. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, just say it." He turned to her, and she saw the anguish in his eyes, but she also saw the hesitation, the calculation. He was weighing options, considering possibilities. Her heart, her feelings, they were part of the equation, but they weren't the whole thing. "I love you," he said. "You know I love you. But this is bigger than us. This is about my mother, about everything she suffered. If I don't take this chance, everything we worked for, everything you sacrificed for, will be for nothing." Clara stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Everything I sacrificed for was you. Not a title, not an estate. You. I know that. And I swear to you, I will find a way to make this right. Once I'm Duke, once the title is secure, I can bring you back. We can be together again. We just have to be patient." "Patient?" Clara's voice was hollow. "You want me to quietly step aside while you marry another woman? And then what? Be your mistress? Live in the shadows while she sits beside you as your duchess? It wouldn't be like that. Wouldn't it?" Clara felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I gave you everything, Adrian. Every penny I had, every hour of my day, every ounce of my strength. I went hungry so you could eat. I wore rags so you could have books. I believed in you when no one else did. And now you're asking me to disappear? I'm asking you to trust me. Trust you." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You're standing here, telling me you're going to marry another woman, and you want me to trust you?" Adrian's face crumpled. "I don't want to do this. But if I don't, Lord Victor will inherit everything. He'll destroy this estate, destroy everything my father built. He's a cruel man, Clara. You've seen it yourself. I can't let him win. So you're doing this for noble reasons? To protect the estate?" "Yes. No. I don't know." Adrian sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "I don't know anything anymore. All I know is that I'm being torn in two directions, and I don't know which way to go." Clara looked at him. This man she had loved, sacrificed for, believed in, and felt something inside her break. "I never wanted to be a duchess," she said quietly. "I never wanted fine clothes or grand houses. I just wanted you. The poor boy who dreamed of justice. The man who promised to never forget what I did for him. I haven't forgotten. Haven't you?" Clara walked to the window and stared out at the manicured gardens, the rolling hills, the world of privilege that had swallowed her husband whole. "Because the Adrian I married would have told that lawyer to go to hell. He would have chosen me." Silence. Long, terrible silence. "I need time," Adrian finally said. "Just a few days. I'll find another way." Clara didn't turn around. "Take all the time you need. But remember this, Adrian. Every choice has a consequence, and some choices can never be undone." The days that followed were a blur of whispered conversations and meaningful glances, of lawyers coming and going, of pressure building from every direction. Clara moved through it all like a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. She saw the way the servants looked at her now, with pity, some of them, and others with barely concealed triumph. She knew what was coming. Long before Adrian admitted it to himself, she knew. The Duke's condition deteriorated rapidly. The doctors hovered constantly, their faces grave, speaking in hushed tones about hours rather than days, and with every passing moment, the pressure on Adrian intensified. Lady Evelyn Sinclair arrived at the estate 3 days after the announcement. She was beautiful, Clara had to admit, tall and elegant, with golden hair and cool blue eyes. She moved through the house like she already owned it, and her father, the Earl of Westmore, watched Adrian with the calculating eye of a man weighing an investment. Clara was introduced to her briefly, a moment of exquisite awkwardness that Lady Evelyn navigated with practiced ease. "Mrs. Kingsley," she said, her smile perfectly polite. "How lovely to meet you. I've heard so much about you." "I'm sure you have," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I want you to know that I understand how difficult this must be for you." Lady Evelyn's tone was sympathetic, but her eyes were cold. "These situations are never easy. Are they not?" "No. But I'm sure we can all behave like adults about it. For Adrian's sake." Clara said nothing. There was nothing to say. That evening, Adrian came to their room with a look on his face that Clara recognized. The look of a man who had made a decision he hated. "I've been talking to the lawyers," he said, his voice strained. "There's no other way, Clara. If I don't do this, everything falls apart. Lord Victor will take the title, and God knows what he'll do with it. People will suffer, innocent people." "And what about me?" Clara asked quietly. "Will I suffer?" Adrian flinched. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. You'll never want for anything. I'll set you up with a house, an income." "I don't want your money." Clara's voice was ice. "I never wanted your money." "Then what do you want?" "I wanted you. The real you. Not this stranger wearing your face." Adrian's expression crumpled. "I'm still the same person, Clara. I'm still the man who loves you. The man who loves me wouldn't divorce me." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. "It's not like that," Adrian said desperately. "It's a legal arrangement, nothing more. Once I'm Duke, once everything is secure, I can have the annulment reversed. We can be together again." "Annulled?" Clara's voice cracked on the word. "You're going to pretend our marriage never happened?" "Only temporarily." "Marriages don't work that way, Adrian. Love doesn't work that way. You can't just set me aside like a piece of furniture and expect me to wait patiently until you're ready to take me back." "So what am I supposed to do?" Adrian's voice rose with frustration. "Give up everything? Let my mother's suffering mean nothing? Let Lord Victor destroy everything my father built? Is that what you want?" Clara looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him clearly. Not the man she had loved, not the poor boy she had rescued, but the man he had become. Ambitious, frightened, desperate to belong to a world that would never fully accept him. "I want you to be the man I thought you were," she said softly. "But I don't think that man exists anymore. Maybe he never did." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Adrian standing alone in the darkness. The divorce papers arrived the next morning. Clara sat at the writing desk in their chambers, the documents spread before her. The legal language was dense and impersonal, reducing their years together, the sacrifices, the struggles, the love, to a series of clauses and conditions. Adrian stood by the window, his back to her. He hadn't spoken since the lawyer had delivered the papers. "This is really happening," Clara said, more to herself than to him. "I'm sorry." Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Clara." "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught between your ambition and your conscience?" He turned to face her, and she saw that his eyes were red. "That's not fair." "No, it's not. None of this is fair." Clara picked up the quill, her hand steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But life rarely is. I learned that a long time ago." "Clara, please, let's talk about this. There has to be another way." "You said yourself there isn't. The lawyers have made it very clear." She dipped the quill in the inkwell. "This is what you want, Adrian. This is the choice you've made." "It's not what I want. It's what you're doing." Clara looked up at him, her eyes dry despite the ache in her chest. "And that's the same thing." She signed her name at the bottom of the document, the quill scratching across the paper like a death knell. Clara Elizabeth Bennett Kingsley. Then she reached up and slowly removed the silver ring from her finger, the simple band Adrian had given her on their wedding day, the ring she had worn for 2 years and treasured beyond all reason. She placed it on the desk beside the signed papers. "I helped a poor man become extraordinary," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I never imagined the extraordinary man would be ashamed of the poor woman who helped him." Adrian made a sound like he had been stabbed. "Clara." "Goodbye, Adrian. I hope your dukedom brings you everything you've ever wanted." She walked out of the room without looking back. She walked out of the house without looking back. She walked away from everything she had built, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had loved. And she didn't cry until she was miles away, alone in a hired carriage, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the shattered pieces of her heart. The Duke of Ashcombe died 3 days later. Adrian's marriage to Clara was formally annulled the following week, as if it had never existed. The legal proceedings were swift and efficient. The House of Lords had no interest in dragging out a matter that might complicate the succession. And 1 month after Clara Bennett walked out of his life, Adrian Kingsley, now officially Adrian Ashcombe, stood before the altar of a grand cathedral in London and married Lady Evelyn Sinclair. The wedding was everything society expected. The bride wore white silk and diamonds. The groom looked appropriately solemn. The guests included half the peerage, their carriages stretching down the street for blocks. Adrian spoke his vows in a steady voice, his face betraying nothing of the turmoil inside him. Lady Evelyn smiled her cool, perfect smile, her hand light on his arm. And somewhere far away, in a small coastal village she had never intended to visit, Clara Bennett stood on a windswept beach and watched the waves crash against the shore. She didn't know about the wedding. She wouldn't know for weeks yet, not until a traveler passing through happened to mention it. By then, the news would feel distant, almost unreal, like something that had happened to another person, in another life. But she felt it anyway. Somewhere deep in her bones, she felt the final severing of the bond she had believed unbreakable. The tide was coming in, the wind was cold, and Clara Bennett, who had once been Clara Kingsley, who had once been a fish seller who dared to love a future duke, stood alone on the sand and let the salt spray wash over her. She didn't cry. She had done all her crying. Now, she had work to do. The town of Whitby was nothing like the villages Clara had known. It was larger, busier, with a harbour that never seemed to sleep. Fishing boats came and went at all hours, and the air was thick with the smell of salt and fish and possibility. Clara had arrived with nothing but a few coins in her pocket, and a heart full of pain, but she had not arrived broken. She refused to be broken. The first few weeks were the hardest. She found a room in a boarding house near the docks, a cramped little space with a narrow bed and a window that looked out onto the grey sea. The landlady, Mrs. Cooper, was a kind woman with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes, and she took one look at Clara and asked no questions. "You're running from something," Mrs. Cooper said, handing Clara the key. "I can always tell, but it's none of my business, and as long as you pay your rent on time, it'll stay that way." "I'm not running," Clara said quietly. "I'm starting over. Same thing, sometimes." Clara found work at the fish market, just as she had done years ago, but this time, she wasn't just a seller, she was an observer. She watched how the merchants negotiated, how they built relationships with fishermen, how they moved goods from the harbour to the markets, to the tables of the wealthy. She learned everything she could, asking questions when she could, listening when she couldn't, and she saved. Every penny she could spare went into a jar beneath her floorboards, just like the old days. But this time, the money wasn't for anyone else. This time, it was for her. "You work harder than anyone I've ever seen," Mrs. Cooper remarked one evening, watching Clara drag herself up the stairs after a 16-hour day. "What are you trying to prove?" "Nothing," Clara said. "I'm just trying to survive." But that wasn't entirely true. She was trying to prove something, to herself, to the world, to the man who had discarded her like a worn-out shoe. She was trying to prove that Clara Bennett was more than just a fish seller, that she was more than just the woman Adrian Kingsley had left behind. Months passed. The seasons turned. Clara's savings grew, slowly at first, then faster, as she began to understand the rhythms of the market. She made connections with fishermen, earning their trust by treating them fairly when other merchants tried to cheat them. She learned which fish commanded the highest prices, which markets had the most discerning customers, which restaurants would pay a premium for the freshest catch. And one day, an opportunity presented itself. It was a small thing, really. One of the fishermen she had befriended, a grizzled old man named Jonah, was being squeezed by a larger merchant who had been underpaying him for years. Jonah was about to lose his boat, his livelihood, everything he had worked for. "I've been at sea since I was 10 years old," Jonah said, his voice rough with despair. "Now some fancy pants merchant thinks he can take my boat because I owe him money. It's not right." Clara listened to his story, and something stirred inside her. She remembered Adrian, all those years ago, talking about his mother, how she had lost everything to corrupt landlords, how there was no one to fight for her. "How much do you owe?" Clara asked. Jonah named a figure. It was more than Clara had saved, but not by much. "I'll pay it," she said. Jonah stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I have a proposition for you." The proposition was simple. Clara would pay off Jonah's debt, and in return, he would work exclusively for her, selling his catch to her at fair prices, giving her first choice of the best fish. It was a partnership, not a master-servant relationship. They would both profit, and neither would be cheated. Jonah agreed without hesitation. It was the first of many such arrangements. Word spread among the fishermen that Clara Bennett was different, that she treated her partners with respect and paid fairly. More fishermen came to her, and Clara's small operation began to grow. She rented a warehouse near the harbour, a dingy, drafty building that she cleaned and repaired with her own hands. She hired workers, first one, then two, then 5. She expanded beyond fresh fish, branching into smoked and salted products that could be shipped inland. And she never, ever forgot the lessons she had learned in her old life. "You drive a hard bargain," one of her suppliers grumbled, shaking his head as she negotiated a particularly favorable price. "I learned from the best," Clara replied with a small smile. "Hard times make hard people." Within 2 years, Clara Bennett was one of the most successful fish merchants on the Yorkshire coast. Her company, Bennett Fisheries, had grown from a single warehouse to a fleet of boats and a network of suppliers that stretched from Whitby to London. She was respected, admired, and increasingly wealthy, but she was also alone. She had employees, business partners, acquaintances, but she had no close friends, no confidants, no one she trusted with the secrets of her past. The walls she had built around her heart were high and thick, and she had no intention of letting anyone breach them. "You work too much," Mrs. Cooper said one evening, watching Clara pore over ledgers in the boarding-house parlour. Clara had long since been able to afford her own house, but she had stayed at the boarding-house out of habit and loyalty. "When was the last time you did something for yourself? Something fun?" "Fun is overrated," Clara said without looking up. "Work is reliable. Work doesn't betray you." Mrs. Cooper sighed. "Whoever hurt you must have done a real number." Clara's hand stilled on the ledger. "Something like that." She never spoke of Adrian. She never spoke of her old life at all. As far as anyone in Whitby knew, Clara Bennett was simply a hard-working businesswoman who had appeared out of nowhere and built an empire through sheer determination. But sometimes, late at night, when the ledgers were closed and the warehouse was quiet, Clara would sit by her window and stare out at the sea, and she would remember. She would remember the boy she had found bleeding in the mud, the dreams they had shared, the promises they had made. She would remember the weight of the silver ring on her finger, the feel of Adrian's hand in hers, the sound of his voice saying, "I love you." And she would wonder where it had all gone wrong. 3 years. That's how long it took for Adrian Kingsley, Adrian Ashcombe, the Duke of Ashcombe, to realize that he had made the worst mistake of his life. The first year had been a whirlwind of activity. The Duke's funeral, the formal assumption of the title, the endless meetings with lawyers and estate managers and political allies. Adrian had thrown himself into his new role with the same intensity he had once applied to his law studies, determined to prove himself worthy of the position. But from the very beginning, things had gone wrong. The first blow came 3 months after his wedding. He was in his study, going over estate accounts, when he found the discrepancy. It was small, a few £100 diverted to a supplier who didn't seem to exist. When he asked questions, the answers were vague and unsatisfactory. "That's Lady Evelyn's account," Mr. Collins said, his expression carefully neutral. "She handles certain household expenses personally. Why would a supplier be paid for goods that were never delivered?" Collins hesitated. "I wouldn't know, Your Grace." Adrian had let it go, telling himself it was a misunderstanding. His wife was from a noble family. She knew how to manage a great house. If there was an explanation, she would provide it. But the discrepancies continued, small amounts at first, then larger. Money that should have gone to estate maintenance, to tenant farmers, to the dozen different expenses that kept a great estate running, all of it disappearing into accounts Adrian couldn't trace. When he finally confronted Evelyn, she laughed. "Darling, you're being paranoid. These are perfectly normal expenses. You wouldn't understand. You weren't raised to manage an estate. Leave the finances to me." The words stung more than he wanted to admit. "I wasn't raised to manage an estate" was a polite way of saying you're a common bastard who doesn't belong here, and Evelyn said it often, in 100 different ways. The second blow came from Lord Victor. Adrian had always known his cousin was dangerous. He had seen the coldness in Victor's eyes, the calculating way he watched and waited. What he hadn't realized was how extensive Victor's influence was. "You have enemies, Your Grace," one of his political allies warned him. "Lord Victor has been spreading rumors. He's telling anyone who will listen that you're unfit to hold the title, that your common upbringing makes you incapable of managing the estate." "That's ridiculous. I've been a barrister. I've managed complex cases. With respect, the House of Lords doesn't care about your legal career. They care about blood. And to them, your blood is tainted." The rumors spread like poison through a wound. Adrian found himself excluded from important meetings, frozen out of social gatherings, treated with barely concealed contempt by men who should have been his allies. And through it all, Evelyn was no help. She spent money with reckless abandon. New gowns, elaborate parties, renovations to the manor that seemed designed more to impress her friends than to improve the estate. She treated Adrian with cool politeness in public, and barely veiled disdain in private. "We both know why you married me," she said one night, after a particularly bitter argument about finances. "It wasn't for love, it was for convenience, so don't pretend to be shocked that I'm not the devoted wife of your dreams." "I never pretended anything." "Good. Then we understand each other." They slept in separate rooms. They dined together only when protocol demanded it, and Adrian found himself lonelier than he had ever been in his life. The third blow came when the old Duke's will was finally settled. Adrian had been told, that the estate was financially sound. The Duke had been wealthy after all, with lands and investments that had supported the family for generations. But the will revealed a different picture. Years of mismanagement, of extravagant spending, and poor investments had eaten away at the fortune. The estate was deeply in debt, and the creditors were circling. "How bad is it?" Adrian asked the accountant, dreading the answer. "Bad, Your Grace. The estate is solvent, but barely. Another year of losses like this, and we'll be forced to sell land." "That can't happen." "Then we need to find new sources of income, and quickly." Adrian thought of the mines on the estate's northern border, the ones that had been abandoned years ago. If they could be reopened, if the minerals could be extracted and sold, it might be enough to save the estate. But reopening mines required capital, and capital was something the estate no longer had. "There is one option," the accountant said hesitantly. "There are investors in London who might be willing to provide funding, but they would expect a significant return." "Find them," Adrian said. "Do whatever you have to do." He didn't know then that the investors had already been contacted, that plans were already in motion, that the trap had already been set. And he certainly didn't know that the trap had been set by his own wife. The evidence came to light on a rainy Tuesday in October. Adrian had been reviewing documents in his study when he found the letters, hidden in a locked drawer in Evelyn's desk, a drawer he had never thought to search before. The letters detailed a conspiracy that took his breath away. Lord Victor and Lady Evelyn had been working together for years. The plan was simple and devastating. Evelyn would drain the estate's finances through fraudulent suppliers and false expenses, funneling the money to accounts controlled by Victor. Victor would use the money to fund his own political ambitions and, when the time was right, would present evidence of the estate's mismanagement to the House of Lords. Adrian would be disgraced, stripped of his title, possibly even charged with fraud. And Victor would finally get what he had always wanted, the dukedom of Ashcombe. Adrian's hands trembled as he read the letters. He thought of everything he had sacrificed, everything he had given up, to claim this title. He thought of Clara, walking away with her head held high, saying, "I helped a poor man become extraordinary. I never imagined the extraordinary man would be ashamed of the poor woman who helped him." And he realized, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that he had thrown away the only real thing in his life for a title that was being stolen out from under him. He confronted Evelyn that evening. She didn't bother to deny it. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," she said coolly, pouring herself a glass of wine. "I didn't think you'd find the letters so quickly. How could you do this? I'm your husband. You're a means to an end. You always were." Evelyn took a sip of wine. "Did you really think I wanted to marry a common bastard who smells of fish? I have ambitions, Adrian, real ambitions, and Victor is going to help me achieve them." "Victor is using you." "Perhaps, or perhaps I'm using him. It doesn't matter." She smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "The end result is the same. You'll be gone, and I'll be free. I'll expose you, both of you. With what evidence? Those letters are hearsay. I'll deny everything, and who do you think the House of Lords will believe? A disgraced, common-born duke who can barely manage his own estate, or the daughter of an earl?" Adrian felt the walls closing in around him. "There has to be a way to stop you." "There isn't. Accept your fate, Adrian. You never belonged here anyway." That night, alone in his study, Adrian thought about Clara. He thought about her strength, her determination, the way she had never given up no matter how hard things became. He thought about the sacrifices she had made for him, the years she had worked and saved and believed in his dreams. And he thought about how he had repaid her. He had been so sure, back then, so certain that he was making the right choice, that the end justified the means. He had convinced himself that he could have the title and Clara too, that he could somehow square the circle and make everything work out. But he had been wrong. He had been so terribly, catastrophically wrong. The legal proceedings began in January. Lord Victor, with Evelyn's support, had filed a formal petition with the House of Lords, challenging Adrian's fitness to hold the title. The charges were devastating: financial mismanagement, fraud, conduct unbecoming a duke. Adrian tried to defend himself. He hired lawyers, gathered evidence, prepared his case with the same meticulous care he had once applied to his legal work. But it was like trying to hold back the tide. Everywhere he turned, he found more evidence of Evelyn's betrayal: documents she had falsified, accounts she had drained, lies she had told. And there was nothing he could do about any of it. "The case is strong against you," his lawyer admitted. "Lady Evelyn and Lord Victor have been planning this for a long time. They've covered their tracks well. There has to be something, some way to prove what they've done. Unless we can find evidence linking them directly to the fraud, evidence that can't be dismissed as hearsay or circumstance, I'm afraid the outlook is bleak." Adrian sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power that had once seemed so important, and felt the full weight of his mistakes crushing down on him. He had given up everything for this: his wife, his honor, his soul. And now he was about to lose it all. The trial, for that's what it was, even if it wasn't called that, began on a cold morning in March. The House of Lords had convened a special committee to hear the evidence, and the proceedings were held in one of the grand chambers of Westminster. Adrian sat at the front of the room, listening to the accusations being leveled against him. Lord Victor's lawyers were skilled, and they painted a damning picture: a common-born man, raised in poverty, who had married above his station, and then proceeded to run one of England's oldest estates into the ground. "The evidence is clear," the lead prosecutor intoned. "His Grace has demonstrated a profound inability to manage the affairs of the Ashcombe estate. Through negligence, incompetence, or deliberate fraud, he has brought the estate to the brink of ruin. The House must act to protect this noble institution from further harm." One by one, witnesses were called: servants who testified to Evelyn's version of events, accountants who presented doctored ledgers, business associates who had been paid to lie. And then Evelyn herself took the stand. She was beautiful in her mourning colors, black silk, a veil of delicate lace, and her voice trembled with carefully rehearsed emotion as she described her husband's failures. "I tried to help him," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I tried to advise him, to guide him, but he wouldn't listen. He was so certain he knew better than everyone. And now," she gestured helplessly at the assembled lords, "now we see the result. It was a masterful performance. Even Adrian, who knew every word was a lie, found himself almost believing her." When it was his turn to speak, he stood before the committee and told the truth. He described the conspiracy, the fraud, the theft. He presented what evidence he had: the letters, the account discrepancies, the testimony of a few loyal servants who had seen through Evelyn's lies. But it wasn't enough. "You've presented an interesting story, Your Grace," the committee chairman said, his tone skeptical. "But stories require proof, and the proof you've presented is circumstantial at best. The letters could have been forged. Lady Evelyn denies writing them, and there are no witnesses to confirm their authenticity. The account discrepancies could be the result of poor record-keeping. Lady Evelyn has testified that you insisted on handling certain finances personally, despite your lack of experience." Adrian felt the trap closing around him. This is a conspiracy. Lord Victor and Lady Evelyn are working together. They've been planning this for years. The chairman raised an eyebrow. "Lord Victor, you say? The same Lord Victor who has been tirelessly working to support the estate during your tenure. The same Lord Victor who has repeatedly offered his assistance and counsel, only to be rebuffed. He's the one who caused the problems in the first place. Do you have proof of this accusation?" Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have proof. He had suspicions, circumstantial evidence, the letters he had found in Evelyn's desk. But proof, solid, undeniable proof, was something else entirely. "I thought not," the chairman said. "This committee will recess to consider its decision. We will reconvene in 3 days' time." 3 days. Adrian walked out of the chamber in a daze. 3 days until his fate was decided. 3 days until everything was lost. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The news reached Whitby 2 days later. Clara was in her office at the warehouse, going over the latest shipment manifests, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Bennett? There's someone here to see you. A gentleman from London." Clara frowned. She had business contacts in London, certainly, but none of them would come all the way to Whitby without sending word ahead. "Who is it?" He wouldn't give his name. He just said it was urgent. Something cold settled in Clara's stomach. She had a feeling she knew who this was, and she didn't want to see him. But she had never been a coward. "Show him in." A moment later, the door opened, and Adrian Ashcombe walked into her office. He looked terrible. His clothes were expensive, but rumpled, his hair unkempt, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and despair. He had aged 10 years in the 3 since she had last seen him, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders that she had never seen before. "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. Clara didn't stand. She didn't offer him a seat. She just looked at him, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace," she said, the title cold and formal. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Adrian winced. "Please don't call me that. Not you. It's your title, isn't it? The title you gave up everything for. The title that was worth more than our marriage, more than our love, more than everything we built together." Clara's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath the calm. "You should be proud of it. You certainly paid enough for it." "I know you're angry." "Angry?" Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Angry doesn't begin to cover it. But that's not important now. Why are you here, Adrian? What do you want?" Adrian sank into the chair across from her desk, his head bowed. "I need your help." "My help?" Clara's voice was flat. "The Duke of Ashcombe needs the help of a common fish seller. How the world turns. I deserve that. I deserve every bitter word you want to throw at me. But please, Clara, just hear me out." Clara leaned back in her chair, studying him. Every instinct told her to throw him out, to tell him she wanted nothing to do with him or his problems. But there was something in his voice, a note of genuine desperation, that made her hesitate. "You have 5 minutes." Adrian took a deep breath. "It's Evelyn and Lord Victor. They've been working together since the beginning. They've been stealing money from the estate, falsifying records, setting me up to take the fall. The House of Lords is about to strip me of my title. I could even face criminal charges. And this is my problem because you're the only one who can help me prove what they've done." Clara frowned. "How?" Adrian reached into his coat and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "These are shipping manifests, records of goods that were supposedly purchased for the estate, goods that were paid for but never delivered. The suppliers are all fake, Shell companies created by Evelyn to funnel money to Victor. Clara took the papers, scanning them quickly. As she read, her frown deepened. These shipping routes, she said slowly. They go through Whitby. Yes, your company handles shipping for half the East Coast. If anyone would have records of these shipments, if anyone could prove the goods never arrived, it's you. Clara set the papers down, her mind racing. This was an opportunity, a chance to help the man who had wronged her, or a chance to watch him suffer the consequences of his choices. The bitter, wounded part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him that he had made his bed, and now he could lie in it, wanted to see him lose everything, just as she had lost everything because of him. But the other part of her, the part that remembered the poor boy with dreams of justice, the part that still believed in doing what was right even when it was hard, hesitated. Why should I help you? She asked quietly. Give me one good reason. Adrian looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. Because you're a better person than I am. Because you always have been. Because if you don't help me, the people who will suffer are the tenants, the workers, everyone on the estate who depends on the Duke for their livelihood. Lord Victor will destroy everything. He'll raise rents, evict families, drain the estate for his own profit. I know I don't deserve your help, but they do. Clara was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. He was right, and she knew it. Whatever Adrian had done to her, the innocent people on the Ashcombe estate didn't deserve to suffer, and Lord Victor, she remembered him well, the cold-eyed man with the cruel smile. She had no doubt that he would be a terrible duke. I'll help you, she said finally. But not for you, for the people who would be hurt if I didn't. Adrian's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Clara. I don't know how to... Don't thank me yet. I haven't done anything. Clara stood, gathering the papers. I'll have my people go through our records. If there's evidence to be found, we'll find it. But I want to be clear about something. Anything. This doesn't change anything between us. When this is over, I want you to leave Whitby and never come back. I've built a life here, Adrian. A good life. And I won't let you destroy it a second time. Adrian nodded, his expression pained. I understand. Good. Now get out of my office. I have work to do. Clara's people worked through the night. The warehouse became a hive of activity as clerks and accountants pored over shipping records, invoices, and manifests dating back 3 years. Clara herself stayed at the center of it all, coordinating the search, her eyes sharp for any discrepancy that might prove useful. It was just before dawn, when one of her senior clerks, a meticulous young man named Thomas, called her over. Miss Bennett, I think I've found something. Clara looked over his shoulder, at the documents spread before him. What is it? These shipments. Thomas pointed to a series of entries. They were supposedly bound for the Ashcombe estate. Furniture, building materials, luxury goods. But look at the destination codes. Clara looked, and her heart began to beat faster. These codes aren't for Yorkshire. No, ma'am. They're for a warehouse in London. A warehouse that, according to these records, is owned by a company called Sinclair Holdings. Sinclair. That's Lady Evelyn's maiden name. Yes, ma'am. And look at this. Thomas pulled out another document. This is a shipping manifest for goods that were supposedly delivered to the Ashcombe estate last year. But our records show the same goods arriving at a different port, under a different name. Clara took the documents, her hands trembling slightly. This was it. This was the proof Adrian needed. Good work, Thomas. Very good work. By mid-morning, Clara had assembled a comprehensive file of evidence. It showed, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Lady Evelyn and Lord Victor had been operating a sophisticated fraud scheme, diverting estate funds, falsifying records, and using shell companies to hide their theft. It was enough to clear Adrian's name, more than enough. The question was, what would she do with it? She sat in her office, the file on her desk, and thought about everything Adrian had done to her. She thought about the years of sacrifice, the love she had poured into him, the dreams she had given up. She thought about the day he had asked her to sign the divorce papers, the coldness in his eyes when he had chosen a title over their marriage. She owed him nothing, less than nothing. And yet, there was still a part of her, a small, stubborn part, that remembered the boy she had found behind the church, the boy who had dreamed of justice, who had sworn to fight for the powerless, who had loved her with the fierce, desperate love of someone who had never had anything to lose. That boy was gone. She knew that. The man who had taken his place was a stranger, a hollow shell of ambition and regret. But the people on the Ashcombe estate, the tenants, the workers, the families who had lived on that land for generations, they didn't deserve to suffer because of one man's mistakes. Clara made her decision. She travelled to London the next day, taking the file with her. The journey was long and exhausting, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying old memories, old hurts, old hopes that she had thought long dead. When she arrived at Westminster, the committee was already in session. The final arguments were being presented, and the mood in the chamber was grim. Adrian sat at the front of the room, his face pale and defeated, while Lord Victor and Lady Evelyn watched from the gallery with barely concealed triumph. Clara took a deep breath and walked through the doors. "I have evidence," she announced, her voice ringing out across the chamber. "Evidence that will prove, beyond any doubt, that the Duke of Ashcombe is innocent of all charges." The room erupted. The committee chairman banged his gavel, calling for order. "Who are you, madam? And what is the meaning of this interruption?" "My name is Clara Bennett." She walked forward, the file clutched in her hands. "I am the owner of Bennett Fisheries, one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. And I have documents that prove Lady Evelyn Sinclair and Lord Victor Ashcombe have been conspiring to defraud the Ashcombe estate." Evelyn's face went white. Victor's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that looked like fear. "This is outrageous," Evelyn said, her voice shrill. "Who is this woman? She has no right." "I have every right," Clara said calmly. "I have the right of someone who believes in justice, the right of someone who refuses to watch innocent people suffer while the guilty go free." She turned to the committee chairman. "These documents are authentic. I stake my reputation on it. If you examine them, you will find that Lady Evelyn and Lord Victor have been stealing from the estate for years, and that the Duke of Ashcombe is guilty of nothing except trusting the wrong people." The chairman took the file, his expression unreadable. "This is highly irregular. I understand, but the truth is the truth, no matter how irregular it may be." The committee recessed to examine the evidence. 3 hours later, they returned with their verdict. After careful consideration of the new evidence presented, the chairman announced, "This committee finds that the charges against the Duke of Ashcombe are without merit. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Lady Evelyn Sinclair and Lord Victor Ashcombe engaged in a conspiracy to defraud the estate and to falsely implicate His Grace. Appropriate legal action will be taken against both parties." The room erupted again, but Clara didn't stay to hear the rest. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her business concluded. She had done what she came to do. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard footsteps behind her. "Clara! Clara, wait!" She stopped, but didn't turn around. "What is it, Your Grace?" Adrian caught up to her, breathing hard. "I don't know how to thank you. What you did in there. I didn't do it for you." Clara's voice was cool. "I did it for the people who would have suffered if you'd been convicted. I did it because it was the right thing to do." "I know, but still." Adrian reached out as if to touch her arm, then thought better of it. "I've made so many mistakes, Clara. So many terrible, unforgivable mistakes. But losing you was the worst of them." Clara finally turned to face him. "Yes, it was. Is there any chance, any hope at all, that you might forgive me?" Clara looked at him. This man she had loved. This man she had sacrificed everything for. This man who had thrown her away like garbage when something better came along. And she felt nothing. Or almost nothing. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said quietly. "Forgiveness isn't the same as trust. It isn't the same as love. I can forgive you, Adrian, but I can never go back. The woman who loved you, the woman who would have done anything for you, she's gone, and she's never coming back." Adrian's face crumpled. "I understand." "Do you? Do you really understand what you lost?" Clara's voice was soft but unyielding. "You lost someone who believed in you when no one else did. Someone who worked herself to exhaustion so you could chase your dreams. Someone who loved you, not for your title or your money or your prospects, but for your heart. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand what you threw away? Tears were streaming down Adrian's face now. Yes, yes, I understand. I've understood it every single day since you left. Good. Then maybe you'll learn something from all this. Clara turned and began walking away. Will I ever see you again? Adrian called after her. She didn't answer. She just kept walking, her head held high, her heart finally, blessedly at peace. The months that followed were a time of reckoning. Lady Evelyn and Lord Victor were arrested and charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The trial was swift and damning. Clara's evidence was irrefutable, and both were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The scandal rocked London society, and for a time, the name Ashcombe was on everyone's lips. But Adrian weathered the storm. With the truth finally exposed, his reputation was restored, and he threw himself into the work of rebuilding the estate. He renegotiated contracts, restructured debts, and invested in the same mines he had once hoped would save him. And slowly, painstakingly, the estate began to recover. But Adrian himself did not. He ruled wisely and justly, but there was no joy in him. He attended social functions when duty demanded, but he never smiled. He managed the estate with meticulous care, but he took no satisfaction in it. The servants whispered that the Duke was haunted, that he had lost something precious and would never be whole again. They were right. 6 months after the trial, Adrian was going through his late mother's belongings, a trunk of old letters and mementos that had been stored in the attic for decades, when he found the sealed letter she had left him all those years ago. The letter he had never opened, because his life had never depended on it. Until now. His hands trembled as he broke the seal and unfolded the yellowed paper. My dearest Adrian, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means that the time has come for you to know the truth. I pray that you are reading it because you need guidance and not because you are in danger. But either way, know that I loved you more than life itself. Adrian read on, tears blurring his vision, as his mother's words reached across the years to touch him. The Duke of Ashcombe is your father. I never told him about you, and I never will. His world is not our world, and I did not want you to grow up feeling like you had to prove yourself to people who would never accept you. I wanted you to find your own way, to become your own man, to build a life based on love and integrity rather than titles and wealth. But if the Duke ever claims you, if you are ever faced with the choice between belonging among the powerful and staying true to yourself, remember this. Never become so eager to belong among the powerful that you forget the person who stood beside you when you belonged nowhere. That person is worth more than all the titles in England. Adrian read the words again and again, his heart breaking anew with every line. His mother had known. She had known the choice he would face, and she had warned him. She had told him what really mattered, and he had ignored her. He had thrown away the person who stood beside him when he belonged nowhere. He had sacrificed Clara on the altar of his ambition, and he had lost everything that made life worth living. The grief hit him like a wave, and Adrian sank to his knees in the dusty attic, clutching the letter to his chest. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room. I'm so sorry, Mother. I'm so sorry, Clara. I failed you both. He stayed there for a long time, weeping. But when he finally rose, something had changed in him. The grief was still there, raw and aching, but beneath it was something else. Determination. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't bring Clara back, but he could honor her memory, honor his mother's memory, by being the kind of duke they would have wanted him to be. Just, compassionate, fair, the kind of man who fought for the powerless instead of bowing to the powerful. It was too late for him and Clara. He accepted that now, but it wasn't too late to make a difference in the world. And that, he decided, was exactly what he would do. 5 years passed. The Ashcombe estate flourished under Adrian's stewardship. The mines were profitable, the tenant farmers were thriving, and the Duke's reputation for fairness and justice had spread throughout the county. He was respected, even admired, and though he never remarried, he was no longer the hollow shell of a man he had been. He had found a kind of peace. Not happiness perhaps, but something close to it. And then, one summer afternoon, a letter arrived that made his heart stop. It was from Clara. He recognized her handwriting instantly, though he hadn't seen it in years. His hands shook as he opened the envelope. Adrian, the letter read, I've been thinking about something you asked me once. You asked if there was any hope that I might forgive you. I told you I already had. But I think, perhaps, there's a difference between forgiveness and letting go of the past. I've spent 5 years building walls around my heart, and I'm tired of living behind them. If you would still like to see me, I'll be in Whitby next month. The decision is yours, Clara. Adrian read the letter 3 times. Then he called for his horse, and began the long journey north. The harbour at Whitby was bustling when he arrived, the fishing boats bobbing in the afternoon sun. Adrian walked along the docks, his heart pounding, until he found her. Clara was standing at the edge of the pier, looking out at the sea. She was older now, they both were, but to Adrian's eyes, she had never been more beautiful. She turned as he approached, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian did something he should have done years ago. He knelt. Right there on the dock, in front of the fishermen and the merchants and anyone else who happened to be watching, the Duke of Ashcombe knelt before Clara Bennett. I thought becoming Duke would make me a great man, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Instead, I lost the woman who made me one. Clara looked down at him, her expression unreadable. You finally learned the law. What law? Every choice has a consequence. Adrian bowed his head. Yes, I've learned that lesson well. Silence stretched between them. The gulls cried overhead, the waves lapped against the pier, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Clara spoke again. Get up, Adrian. You're making a scene. He rose slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Does this mean? It means I'm willing to try. Clara's voice was steady, but there was something softer in her eyes now. Slowly, carefully. I'm not the same woman I was 5 years ago, and you're not the same man, but I've missed you. Despite everything, I've missed you. I've missed you too. Every single day. Then let's see where this goes. One step at a time. Adrian nodded, tears streaming down his face. One step at a time. They didn't embrace. They didn't kiss. They simply stood there on the pier. 2 people who had loved and lost, and somehow found their way back to each other. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no guarantees, no promises of happily ever after. Too much had happened. Too many wounds needed healing. Too many years had passed. But it was a beginning. And for Adrian and Clara, that was enough. As the sun began to set over the harbour, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, they walked together along the shore. They talked about small things, the weather, the fishing, the business Clara had built. They didn't talk about the past, not yet. There would be time for that later. For now, they simply walked. And somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, and the tide rolled in, and the world kept turning. But for 2 people who had once lost everything, the world had given them a second chance. And this time, they wouldn't waste it. Do you think Adrian truly deserved Clara's forgiveness after everything he put her through? Or did she give him more grace than he ever earned? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable historical romances.